What's going on, friends? Are Harley-Davidsons unreliable? Is it old technology? Are these bikes going to leave you stranded on the side of the road? Not necessarily. Harley-Davidson is actually a very reliable machine, and I would argue they're just about as reliable as anything else out there, especially in the long term, and I'm going to show you why. Harley-Davidson has a lot of critics. There's a lot of people out there that like to hate on Harley-Davidsons and say, oh, they're slow, oh, they're underpowered, oh, these bikes, it's old technology, and they're going to break down on you. You're better off just going out and buying a metric cruiser and being done with it. Well, that is true maybe in some senses, but honestly, anything after the shovel head is actually a pretty reliable machine. Evos, twin cams, even the Milwaukee 8s, yes, they do have some nuances between the years, but for the most part, overall, they're actually very reliable machines. Now, I say everything Evo and up, the Shovelhead is not a bad motor. It's not typically unreliable, but with a Shovelhead, you definitely want to know what you're doing, you definitely want to know how to work on one, and you definitely want to know how to fix it on the side of the road if you have to. Guys, please don't forget, if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Now, as I mentioned, Evo and up, twin cam Milwaukee 8, these are actually all very reliable engines. Yes, certain years had some problems, but it wasn't guaranteed to happen on every single motorcycle. Now, except for the twin cam 88s, the early versions from 99 to 02, with the spring tensioners in it, yes, those are pretty much time bombs, and you're living on borrowed time. Now, a lot of the later bikes with the spring tensioners in them, we're talking 2002 and up, they weren't nearly as bad as the original 99, 2000, and 2001 models, but still, it's a good idea to change that out. But any Harley-Davidson, well taken care of, you keep up with the maintenance, these bikes are going to run for years and years and years without any issues. Yes, they do cost more up front, but what you pay for up front, this actually will kind of make up for itself in the long run. Harley-Davidson is reliable for the long term. And what I mean by reliable for the long term, if you take good care of your engine, you change the oil, you do all the required maintenance, it is not uncommon for any Harley-Davidson engine, Evo, twin cam, or Milwaukee 8 to run 100,000 miles. And this is where the reliability at 100,000 miles comes in. By this time, do they necessarily need a rebuild? That's kind of iffy. All motors are different, some are better than others, even the exact same one. But at that 100,000 mile mark, you have the option of going in and actually completely rebuilding the motorcycle. You can rebuild the engine, no problem. A well taken care of Harley-Davidson, you perform all the maintenance on time, and you're just not flat out abusing the bike. You're riding it as intended, as a cruiser. It's not uncommon for these bikes to run 100,000 miles or more. And now at that 100,000 mile mark, yes, it may need a rebuild, it may not need a rebuild. Every motor's different. Even the ones that come off the same line on the same day, they're completely different. One may be better than the other. But if you do need a rebuild, you can actually get parts to do this. And it's actually a lot cheaper than buying another bike. Now, I know a lot of guys are going to say, well, I could just get a Gold Wing and go 500,000 miles. I could buy this metric cruiser or that metric cruiser, and it'll do 100,000 miles standing on its head. Yeah, that's true with the proper maintenance. But metric bikes aren't exactly all they're cracked up to be. I've seen Kawasaki's, I've seen Hondas, you name it. I've seen them with knocking bottom ends at 30,000 miles. So even the metric bikes, some are better than others. But the difference between the metric and the Harley-Davidson is that buying a metric bike, that to me, that's a roll of the dice. I'm not knocking them, they're great bikes, but you buy one, you cannot get parts for these things, especially if you buy an older one. Yes, you may have spent $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, maybe $5,000 on it, but you're rolling the dice that that thing is going to last you for several years till you get your money out of it. The problem is if you do have a problem with it, and eventually you will, you're not going to be able to get parts for it. You're either going to have to buy another one and try to fix this one, because that's basically your only option. All your parts are going to be discontinued. There was not a huge market for aftermarket parts, especially engine parts, for metric motorcycles. And not to mention that, Harley-Davidson, having their engine stay the same for so long, this really works to our benefit and it makes that extra cost of buying that Harley worth it. So in that sense, Harley-Davidson is very, very reliable for the long run. Now with that said, if you're thinking about buying a metric cruiser or a Harley-Davidson, yes, you can buy the metric cheaper, but are you willing to roll the dice on that bike that's got 20,000, 30,000 miles on it and only cost about $3,000? Yes, it can be paid for in cash. Yes, it's paid for, but $2,000 or $3,000 you can spend a little bit more, get you a nice used Harley, and have that benefit of knowing that if something breaks on that engine, you're not completely out that money that you paid for that bike. And the same is true if you're buying a brand new cruiser. If you're going to spend $20,000 on, say, a Kawasaki Voyager, it might be worth your money to go ahead and maybe buy a basic Street Glide or Road Glide. 107, deck it out a little bit. Yes, it's going to cost you more money, but you have the benefit of knowing that you're going to be able to keep that bike and not have thrown that money away on it when it actually breaks. Because a lot of times with metrics, they are not worth rebuilding. If you were to find the parts, the amount of money it's going to cost you to have somebody actually tear that bike down and get it fixed for you, it really exceeds the value of a motorcycle in a very, very bad way. Now, I want to address the thing where a lot of the critics will say that Harley-Davidson is very behind the times, it's old technology, whatever. Yeah, basically the engine architecture is. That is not something I'm going to deny. But who did Harley-Davidson have to compete with? Harley-Davidson has literally done their own thing this whole entire time. They've built cruisers. And what did all the other manufacturers do? They tried to copy Harley-Davidson, and they did put a little more updated technology into their engines. I mean, granted, everybody else went fuel injection before Harley-Davidson, and nobody really used a chain-driven primary anymore. But it works for Harley-Davidson. The way the engine fires, that chain-driven primary is just perfect. Now Harley-Davidsons have fuel injection. They're right pretty much on par with every other manufacturer out there in the cruiser segment. Even though the cruiser segment's pretty small these days, it's pretty much down to Indian, Harley-Davidson, and some of the various manufacturers like Kawasaki, Honda, that actually still make a cruiser. So when it comes to comparing a used Harley-Davidson to a used metric, I would say Harley-Davidson is just as reliable as that metric motorcycle, just for the fact that if it breaks, you can fix it. You know it's going to break. Same thing with the metric. The difference is you can actually keep the Harley-Davidson on the road. This is why I say Harley-Davidson is a reliable, solid investment, because you're not going to be out a big chunk of change on buying a used bike, or even a new bike for that fact. Yes, Harley-Davidson does command a little bit more money, well, actually a lot more with comparable models, but these bikes are actually going to be with you for a long time. You can keep it as long as you want. And honestly, Harley-Davidson on the new bikes, the 2-year unlimited miles warranty, that says something to me that those bikes are actually pretty dang reliable. But as I mentioned, they did have certain nuances between the years. Twin cam 88s with the chain tensioners. Then we had the 96s with the compensators. 103s were pretty good. I mean, still there's some little nuanced things in there. But as I mentioned, it doesn't happen to every bike. So buying a Harley really is a pretty safe bet. And not only that, if you do find a problem later, you have the peace of mind knowing you can correct this problem and you don't have to just throw the whole thing away. I've seen it before. You get a good deal on a used metric cruiser, next thing you know, the bottom end starts knocking on it. And pretty much the only thing you've got left to do at that point is just ride it till it dies. And then once it dies, your only options are, like I said, buy another one to try to fix it or start parting that one out to recoup some of your money. You do not have that option of rebuilding that bike. Because as I mentioned, there just was never a big aftermarket for aftermarket cruiser parts and performance accessories for these bikes. With the Harley-Davidson, you can do so much more with it. And that's why it's a solid, reliable investment. And now with the Milwaukee 8, I would argue to say that Harley-Davidson really is kind of on the cutting edge of cruiser technology when it comes to their engine architecture. We got variable valve timing now. We got all the electronic engine controls. Everything's there. So guys, Harley-Davidsons are not time bombs. These things are going to last just as long as anything else out there with proper maintenance and upkeep. Yes, there are performance parts available. Yes, there are better parts available for these bikes than what comes stock. That is with anything. And one argument that will always come up is, well, they didn't need all that stuff for the metric motorcycles. Well, that was the thing. Nobody was really heavily modifying metric motorcycles the way they did Harley-Davidsons. If people were really into Kawasaki Vulcans, there would have been a whole market out there for it of things that they could have gone into the engine and actually improved over stock. But guys, I want your opinions. Is Harley-Davidson that reliable, or is it just a total piece of crap? How many miles have you put on your Harley-Davidson before you've had any issues with it, or any major problems, or even needed a rebuild? What's the highest mileage Harley-Davidson motorcycle that you have seen, or even owned? But anyhow, guys, that's all I got for you this week. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit that like button, and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. But until next week, guys, you stay safe on the streets, ride smart, dodge those cars. I'll catch you guys back here next week with a brand new video. Thanks for watching.